According to Commonwealth's March 23rd, 2018 issue, Billy Graham befriended a total of 8 presidents, from Dwight D. Eisenhower to Bill Clinton, with the exception of John F. Kennedy. Today we will be walking through the life of Billy Graham. Billy Graham is an important figure to know in our lives because he's one of the greatest preachers that have been known across the world. He's preached to so many more people than we could ever imagine. First, we will be talking about Billy's life before he became an evangelistic preacher, before he became famous. Next, we will talk about his life through his time as a preacher, and then finally we will wrap up with talking about his life after he retired. Let's get started by going through Graham's life before evangelism. First, we will be discussing how Graham became an evangelistic, along with a background of his life. So, according to March 17, 2018 issue of World Magazine, William Billy Frank Graham was born on November 7th of 1918 on his family farm near Charlotte, North Carolina, where he grew up in a Christian home. Commonwealth's March 23rd, 2018 issue discusses how when Billy Graham was just in his 20s, he accomplished so much. He served briefly as a college president in Minneapolis. He developed a radio station and eventually put together a team of gospel singers and organizers that would become the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. In the April 2018 Billy Graham issue of Christianity.com, in 1943, Billy and his wife Ruth got married, and shortly after, a couple years later, in 1946, they hit the road as Billy spoke at Youth for Christ rallies and reversal campaigns. And just at the age of 31, he became famous nationally with his insanely successful 8-week crusade in Los Angeles, California. Now that we have discussed some of Billy's early life, let's look at his life as an evangelist. Billy spent the majority of his life preaching as an evangelist across the world for over half a century. In March 17, 2018 of World Magazine, it begins to talk about how literally invitations for him across the U.S. began to spring up after his famous 8-week crusade in Los Angeles. After the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association got off of his feet, it began to help reach the demands that people wanted. And Graham went on to preach for over the next 50 years to live audiences of more than 200 million people, more than 400 times, through crusades and outreach missions in 185 countries. That's nearly the entire world. The entire world has 195 countries. That is insane. Still, no one to this day has made more live speaking appearances than he has in his lifetime. World Magazine also includes how him and his team pledged the following in order to avoid questionable situations. They pledged to avoid any appearance in financial support and emphasis on offerings. They pledged to avoid any appearance of sexual impropriety, and they also encouraged Christian unity and strived for honesty and reliability in the public. Now that we have talked about Billy Graham's time as a famous preacher and evangelist, let's examine his life after retirement. After decades and decades of preaching and doing what God called him to do, Billy Graham retired at the age of 86, and that's later than most people would. According to World Magazine's March 17, 2018 issue, Billy Graham retired at the age of 86 after 60 years of preaching on the road. And due to his diminishing health and worsening Parkinson's disease, he reluctantly retired from the public of evangelism. Also, in the same issue of World Magazine, Billy Graham is interviewed by someone, and he talks to them saying, I want to be remembered as a person who was faithful to God, faithful to the scriptures, faithful to my family, and faithful to my calling. A man who dedicated his life to the Lord and never looked back. and he surely left that impact on the world. In March 23rd, 2018 issue of Commonweal, which was written about a month after his death, Billy Graham died at the age of 99 on February 21st of 2018 from natural causes, which was about 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about that he almost made it to 100, and he would have been 100 that November. Now that we have discussed Billy Graham's life before, during, and after his time as a preaching evangelist, let's look back on what we've learned. First, I discussed Billy's life before he became famous, where we learned where he was born and raised, when he got married, some of his achievements, and when he became famous across the nation. Next, we briefly examined Graham's life during his time as evangelist and what he accomplished during the half of a century he did it within, and what his team and himself committed themselves to do. Finally, I shared about his life after he decided to retire in the game later than most people would at 86, and the lasting impact that he left on our world. Here's something as an appreciation for listening, and I hope you all enjoyed. In the Commonweal's issue of March 2018, one of Billy's professors was talking to him and left an impact on him as a young man in college. God can use that voice of yours, he told him. And that really encouraged me, and I hope it encourages you, that how can you use something to benefit others? I really hope you enjoyed everything, so thank you for listening.